In early 2002, Alan Bates and his wife Terra pulled up to a home in Birmingham, Alabama to pick up Alan's two young daughters from their mother's house so that Alan could spend time with them. They were maybe a little nervous and ready for a fight because at this point, the relationship between Alan and his ex-wife, Jessica McCord, had been rocky and incredibly confrontational for years. But Alan loved his daughters. He wanted to see them, so he wasn't letting the issues with their mother get in the way. He and Terra had actually flown from their home in Maryland to do just that, and they weren't going back without Alan seeing them and being able to spend some time with them. So when he saw the note on the front door saying that the McCords were having problems with their front door and asking them to come around to the back one instead, they did as instructed. By the way, things were incredibly tense between both couples because the Bates were also in town to testify against the McCords so that they could get custody of the two girls. And this was going to be the climax to a story that had gone on for years and years. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. If you are brand new to listening to this podcast, first of all, welcome. I'm super pumped that you're here. Get comfortable and enjoy this 10-minute or so story. I always say or so because I never know exactly. When I start talking, I know a general idea of how long the story is going to take to tell. Sometimes I ramble and sometimes I get a little bit too much to the point and it ends up being short or it ends up being long. Sometimes it's right in the money. Who knows? I don't even know at this point if this one's going to be long or short, but we'll find out together. If you're brand new, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes of 10-Minute Murder. Connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The links are in the show notes of this episode, or you can just search in the search bar inside any of those apps, and 10-Minute Murder will pop right up. All right, now let's get to the story today. You heard at the beginning of this episode how this becomes a story that I'm talking about on a murder podcast. But let me tell you how it all started. Alan and Jessica met in high school in 1989, and even then they were a bit of an odd couple. Alan was outgoing and social, and Jessica was much quieter, and she liked to hang out with the goth kids. But even then, she wasn't exactly welcome in their social circles either. But Alan saw something in her that he liked, and they became a couple. Jessica became pregnant, and the two teenagers quickly married, and Alan had to refocus his life so that he could provide for his young family. He worked and he went to school so he could build a better future for the family, but Jessica was still unhappy. She wanted him to spend more time with her, but she also wanted to live in a better house, have a nicer car, nicer things all around, but she had no interest in helping Alan figure out how to get all of that stuff. She stayed home with their two daughters and bombarded Alan whenever he came home with a list of things that she wanted. And Alan tried his best. He stayed there for years, juggling work and college and a life with two young children. But when he found out that Jessica had started having an affair, he drew the line. Jessica was reluctant to agree to a divorce at first. When she found out that she would get custody of the girls and would be receiving child support from Alan, she said okay. Things settled for a few years. Jessica allowed Alan visitation rights, and Alan focused on finishing school and setting himself up. But the life plan changed when Alan met Terra Klug. Terra was an artist and studying to become a museum curator when she met him, and they were both working in a local theater. The two fell head over heels in love and were married in 2000. But Jessica had no intentions of being upstaged. She made things very difficult, often hiding the girls away at her mother's house anytime Alan would come to pick them up for visitations, or just making sure that no one was home. And then she stopped answering his calls, making sure that he couldn't speak to the girls for his court-appointed weekly phone call, sometimes changing her number without telling him, sometimes even moving houses so that he'd have no idea where they were. And maybe Jessica felt a bit braver than she did before. She had also remarried shortly before Alan, and she had met her new husband while working in the local sheriff's department. Jeff McCord was a sheriff's deputy, and it wasn't long after Jessica started dating him that she physically attacked Alan when he came to pick up the girls one time, leading to her losing her job in the department. But the marriage between Jessica and Jeff still went ahead, and the couple moved in together, living off of Jeff's wages, and they started to rack up a lot of debt. Because of course Jessica still had a long list of things that she wanted. They kept their cool though, and they still had child support payments coming in from Alan. As long as they had that, they could keep treading water. But Jessica didn't really want Alan to see the girls any more than he did. He kept taking her to court over and over again, and each time Jessica would completely ignore the court's rulings, eventually landing herself in jail for 10 days for being in contempt of court and not allowing Alan to see his children. Alan knew that she was never going to stop this. He saw the strain all of this was having on the girls, and he knew that they were not going to get any better. So he and Terra decided to file for full custody. This was the worst thing that could happen for Jessica and Jeff. Not only was Jessica probably losing the girls, but she would definitely be losing the child support payments, and she thought she needed to do something about that. When Alan and Terra flew out to see the girls and go to the custody hearing the next day, Jessica wrote the note asking them to come around to the back door. When they got there, she was all smiles and gave them a big welcome, told them to go sit in the family room. She asked them if they wanted anything and left to go get them something to drink from the kitchen, telling them that the girls would be right down. But the girls were not there. The girls were at their grandmother's house. Jeff McCord walked into the family room and he shot both of them 4 times without ever giving them a chance to talk or fight back. He and Jessica then stuffed their bodies in the trunk of the car that Alan had rented to use while they were in Birmingham, and Jeff started driving. Jessica followed close behind in their car while they searched for somewhere to stage the scene. They found a remote spot, arranged Alan and Terra's bodies in the front, and then they set the car on fire, trying to make it look like a carjacking gone too far. And then they busied themselves securing alibis. They stopped at a Home Depot where there are receipts and cameras, and then they went and bought movie tickets. And they hoped that that was that. But someone saw the smoke coming from the car and thought that it might be a forest fire. So firefighters and the police quickly discovered the Bates' car and their bodies, much faster than the McCords had anticipated. At this point, both Alan and Terra had been too badly burned to be identified, but the police were able to run the plates on the car and they found out that the car had been rented out in their name. From there, it didn't take them long to find out about the issues the two families had been having over the custody of the 2 girls, and Jessica and Jeff were almost immediately named suspects. The police were able to obtain a warrant to search the property and they went in. They found circumstantial evidence, but enough evidence to arrest the 2. They found a piece of a paper towel roll used to start the car fire, and then they found that same kind of roll in Jessica and Jeff's house. And they found more than enough evidence to prove that something else had happened at that house. There were traces of blood on the coffee table. Some of the tiles had been replaced, and wallpaper along a strip of a wall had been just recently put up. Jessica and Jeff had done it in a hurry because it wasn't even straight. When they took it down, they found a bullet hole behind it, and it was made with the same caliber of bullet that killed both Alan and Terra. Jessica and Jeff McCord were taken to court, and Jessica pled guilty, getting a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Jeff McCord was sentenced with the same, but with a possibility of parole after 25 years. The lighter sentence was because he agreed to testify against his wife. He has since been denied parole. That's today's 10-minute murder. Brief and bingeable true crime. Thanks for listening today, and before you scoot out of here back to your normal life of not hearing about murder, or maybe on to another episode, be sure that we are connected on social media. You can send me story suggestions if you want, and see some of the visuals that go along with the stories that you hear about here on the podcast. Links to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are in the show notes if you need them. Or you can just type 10-minute murder into the search bar. You know, it's the same place where you would normally go to creep on your ex. Don't do that today. Have a cup of coffee, wash your face, and connect with this podcast. If we're already connected, you're already subscribed, then the last thing to do is to let your friends know about 10-minute murder. Only though, if you're relatively sure that they are people that are interested in true crime. It's very polarized. People are usually interested in it or are shocked that people like us exist. So be careful who you talk about it. I can't be held responsible for damaged relationships. Thanks for listening to 10 Minute Murder. Be safe and make good choices.